The Osborne Internet-linked Encyclopedia of the Ancient World. Everyday Life, page 299. Family life. The family was an important part of the Roman life, and most Romans took their duty to their families very seriously. Families were larger than we are used to today, and normally included the head of the family, known as the paterfamilias, his family and wife, children, sons, wives, and children, and all their slaves. A father's power. It was a father's duty to look after his family and lead their worship of the household gods. During the Republic, the paterfamilias was a very powerful figure. He had the right to whip or imprison his children, and could even put them to death or sell them as slaves. But most fathers were affectionate parents, and during the empire it became a crime for a father to sell or execute his children. Clients and patrons. As well as the family members who lived with him, a wealthy Roman would also have lots of supporters or clients who relied on his help. He was known as their patron. Clients were expected to visit their patron every morning, accompany him wherever he went out, and vote for him if he decided to enter politics. In return, he would sometimes lend his clients money, help them with their careers, and occasionally ask them to dinner. Weddings. Young Romans didn't have very much choice about who they got married to. Their parents usually chose their husband or wives for them, often in order to make an alliance with another powerful or wealthy family. Girls could get married at the age of 12, but their husbands were often much older than this. When a couple became engaged, a family party was held, and the girl was given a ring for the third finger of her left hand. The night before their wedding, the bride offered her childhood toys to the gods of the household shrine. The next morning she was dressed in a white tunic, a saffron yellow cloak and shoes, and a flaming red veil. On her head she wore a garland of flowers. When the bridegroom and guests arrived, an animal was sacrificed, and priests examined its insides to find out if the gods approved of this marriage. Then the marriage contract was read and signed. This gave details of the dowry to be paid by the bride's father to the groom. The bride and groom joined hands and made their vows. After a party at the house of the bride's family, the bride and groom led a procession of flute players and torch bearers to the groom's house. The groom carried his bride over the threshold, and the couple began their life together. And funerals. Death was commonplace in Roman families. Many women died in childbirth, and lots of diseases that are curable today were fatal in Roman times. When an important Roman died, the body was washed and covered in oil. If the person was a senator, he was dressed in his official robes. Then the body lay on display for several days so visitors could pay their last respects. On the day of the funeral, the body was carried in the procession to the Forum, where a speech was made to praise the dead person. The body was then either buried or cremated. It was against the law to bury a person's body or ashes inside the city, so Roman tombs were always built outside the city walls. Growing up. Children from all but the poorest homes were brought up to serve the state and help to improve their family's position in society. Boys were trained for service in the army of the government, while girls were expected to marry well and produce children who would become loyal Roman citizens in their turn. Starting life. When a child was born, its father would lift it in its arms to show that he accepted it into the family. Every Roman parent wanted a healthy baby boy. Baby girls and sickly boys were sometimes left outside to die. Babies were named at 8 or 9 days old and were given a lucky charm called a bulla to ward off evil spirits, but many children died in the first few years of life. A woman might have as many as 6 or 7 babies and still end up childless. Fun and games. Roman children played a wide variety of games, including hide-and-seek, leapfrog, hopscotch. A baby's first toy was usually a pottery rattle, often shaped like a bird, with small pebbles inside. Older children had toy animals to play with, as well as seesaws, swings, hobby horses, marbles, and hoops for rolling along the ground. Girls played with dolls made of wood, clay, or cloth, while boys had wooden swords. Some lucky children even had miniature chariots pulled by goats or geese. School days. Children from poor families had to go out to work at an early age. But families who could afford to send their children off to school when they were 7, girls and boys were taught together at a school called Ludus, where they learned reading, writing, arithmetic. Younger pupils had to recite the alphabet and copy out simple proverbs, while older children read the works of Greek and Roman authors. A slave called a pedagogist took the children to school and kept an eye on them in class. Most schools only had about 12 pupils, and the school day lasted from dawn until noon without a break. Discipline was very strict, and beatings were common. Pupils left the Ludus at the age of 11. Boys could continue their education at a secondary school or grammaticus, where they studied Greek and Roman literature, history, geography, astronomy, music, math, and athletics. Girls stayed at home and began preparing for marriage. Most Roman men didn't like their women to be too well educated. The poet Juvenal declared, "I hate a woman who reads." Boys to men. When a boy was about 14, he officially became an adult at a special ceremony held in the Forum. He put aside the clothes and bulla he had worn as a child and was given an adult toga. He also had his first shave and was registered as the Roman citizen. Most young men then began training for the army. Those who wanted to enter politics also had to learn the art of public speaking and were sent to the teacher called the rhetor. The richest families sent their sons away to Athens or Rhodes to study with the best Greek teachers who lived there. This training could have continued throughout life. Even an experienced politician would take time off work if a good teacher was in town. Roman women. The ideal Roman woman was a good housekeeper, a caring mother, and an obedient wife. She ran the home, took care of her children's early education, and supported her husband in his career. In theory, Roman women had very few rights, but most of them had lots of power behind the scenes. Women's rights. A Roman husband had the right to divorce his wife if she could not have children, if she became ugly, or if she argued with him too much. He could even sentence her to death if she was unfaithful. A wife, on the other hand, could only divorce her husband if he deserted her, joined the army, or became a prisoner of war. But although the law was very unfair, Roman history is full of examples of respectful and devoted husbands who got on well with their wives. Working women. Not all Roman women could afford to stay at home and look after the family. Some had jobs as midwives or hairdressers, while many helped out in the family's shop or farm. A few women worked as acrobats or dancers, but these jobs weren't considered respectable. Changing times. During Republican times, most women had large families and stayed at home spinning and weaving cloth. But by the time of the empire, some wealthy wives had different ideas about how they wanted to spend their time. Several Roman writers complained about idle women who neglected their duty to have children and spent their time pampering themselves and attending dinner parties. Powerful women. Rich women supervised large households with lots of slaves, and a wife often ran her husband's business while he was away. Many politicians' wives took an active interest in their husbands' careers. By crafty plotting and scheming, they made sure that their husbands succeeded in public life and that their enemies were dealt with mercilessly. Slaves and freedmen. Most Roman families relied on slaves to help them run their homes, keep their businesses going, and farm their land. Slaves were usually bought from dealers or were born into a slave family. They had no rights and belonged entirely to their master or mistress. Household slaves. Many slaves worked in private homes, doing the household shopping, cooking, and cleaning. They also served at meals and helped their mistress with her hair, her clothes, or her makeup. In many Roman homes, slaves were treated kindly, and sometimes the children of a trusted slave were brought up as companions for their master's children. In the country, slaves worked as laborers on farms, and in towns they helped in shops and workshops. Educated slaves. Many slaves from Greece had a good education and were expensive to buy. They worked in wealthy Roman homes as private tutors, doctors, and librarians, or even employed by the government. Well-educated government slaves helped run the empire, and they often rose to important positions. A hard life. For many slaves, life was very hard. Some were made to work in appalling conditions in the mines, while others had to stoke the burning hot furnace in the public baths. Many worked on building sites where they were given all the most dangerous jobs, and some trained as gladiators and had to fight to death in the arena against wild animals or other gladiators. Becoming free. Slavery wasn't always for life, and some slaves were granted freedom as a reward for loyal service. Other slaves managed to save small amounts of money and buy their own freedom. Very occasionally, a gladiator was freed because he had fought bravely and survived many fights. Freed slaves were given the status of freedmen and could buy property and keep their own slaves. Under some emperors, freedmen could even become Roman citizens. Some of the emperor's freed slaves worked as his personal secretaries and gained great power in the empire. Living in a town. The Romans spread their way of life to all the areas they conquered and built towns all over the empire. These towns had grand temples, bathhouses, arenas, as well as lots of shops and restaurants. The wealthiest Roman families owned elegant town homes, but most people lived in an apartment block, which they called insulae. Home comforts? Apartment blocks could be up to 7 floors high, and in poor areas of town, they were often dark, crowded, and dirty. Some of these buildings were so badly built that they collapsed without any warning, killing many of the people inside. Most apartments had no running water or toilets, so many people used public lavatories. These were very sociable places where people sat side by side and chatted, but you could pay to use them. You had to pay to use them. Poorer people simply used a bucket at home. Running water. Each town needed lots of fresh water to supply its bathhouses, toilets, and drinking fountains. This water was carried to the towns through a system of pipes and channels called aqueducts. Street life. Most towns had straight paved streets laid out in a neat grid pattern. The main streets were broad, but there were often many narrow alleys too. Often the streets were full of waste which people had thrown out of windows, so stepping stones were built to let people cross without getting filthy. The streets of a town were lined with dozens of different shops, from butchers and fruit sellers to carpenters, sandal makers. These were the taverns and restaurants as well as markets, where people could buy anything from vegetables to slaves. Meeting and greeting. In the middle of town was a large market square or forum, where everyone could mingle. There merchants bought and sold goods, taxes were collected, and people played games. The forum also had a raised platform where town officials stood to make speeches in the crowds. Around the forum were statues, monuments, and temples, and along one side was a huge building called a basilica. The basilica was used as a law court, a town hall, and a public meeting place. A house in town. Most wealthy Roman families had a comfortable house in town. Although these houses varied in size, each house, or domus, followed the same basic design and was sturdily built from stone, cement, and wood. Houses were peaceful, private places designed to keep cool in the hot Roman summers. But they were also designed to welcome visitors. Important people spent lots of money and made their homes look very grand to impress their guests. Do come in. A typical domus was arranged around a hall called the atrium, where guests were received. The central part of the ceiling was open to the sky, and beneath the opening was an ornamental pool known as the impulvium. The atrium usually had a shrine to the household gods as well. Around the atrium were the dining room, kitchen, study, and the wealthiest homes also had a bathroom. People who had no bathroom at home used the public bathhouse. The rooms next to the street were often rented out as shops. Inviting interiors. Although townhouses looked quite plain from the outside, they could be lavishly decorated inside. The walls were smoothly finished with plaster and were often adorned with beautiful paintings known as frescoes. The floors were laid with stunning mosaics made from baked clay, glass, or stone tiles, and life-size statues in marble or bronze helped make the rooms look even more dramatic. Furniture. Grand houses were extravagantly furnished with intricately carved marble tables, couches decorated with ivory and gold, and gleaming bronze lampstands. Sometimes the floors were covered with leopard skins or fine Egyptian rugs. However, most Roman houses had just a few simple pieces of wooden furniture. Keeping warm. Wealthy Romans had toilets and running water in their homes, as well as a central heating system called a hypocaust. This ingenious Roman invention was powered by a furnace in the basement, and once the house heated up, it stayed warm for a long time. In the garden. At the back of the house was the peaceful walled garden called a peristyle. The peristyle was often planted with neat hedges, bay trees, and rose bushes, and might be decorated with elegant statues, a fountain, or a fish pond. Romans loved to relax and chat in these tranquil, shady places away from the hustle and bustle of city life. Living in the country. Although the Roman Empire is famous for its towns, most people actually lived in the country. Many townspeople saw life in the countryside as a peaceful alternative to living in a crowded city. But the reality was anything but relaxing for most country people, and the slaves who worked the farms had to endure hours of back-breaking toil in the fields. Early farms. In the early days of the Republic, most farms were small and family-owned. Farmers grew grain, grapes, and olives, and kept a few sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle. Most farmers produced just enough to feed their families, and any leftover crops were sold in markets. The rise of the landowners. In the 3rd century BC, lots of farmers had to leave Italy to go and fight war overseas. Many of these men never returned, and their farms fell into ruin. Other farms were devastated by wars in Italy itself. Rich landowners bought up lots of these ruined farms, combined them to make large estates, and used slaves to work on the estates. Farming became very profitable, and the landowners were some of the wealthiest men in the Roman world. Slaves in the countryside. By the time of the empire, almost all farm workers were slaves, and they did a variety of exhausting jobs. They had to plant and harvest crops with just a few simple tools, chop down trees to clear new fields, and look after animals. One of the hardest jobs was being a shepherd. Sheep were often kept in remote highland areas, and the shepherd had to cope with loneliness, bad weather, and thieves trying to steal his animals. Supplying the cities. Roman cities depended on the countryside for food, building materials, wood to burn. During the empire, the most important farm products were grapes and olives, used to make wine and olive oil. Cereals such as wheat, oat, and barley. Farm animals provided townspeople with meat, milk, cheese, and wool. Crops such as fruit and vegetables were usually sold at local towns, but olive oil, wine, and grain were exported in huge quantities to cities all over the empire. As Rome grew, farms in Italy could no longer provide enough grain to feed everyone. At the height of the empire, 2/3 of Rome's grain was imported from Egypt. A country villa. Many wealthy Roman families had a large house or villa in the countryside where they went to escape from the stress of city life and the hot summers in town. The family usually owned all the farmland around their villa and made lots of money by selling products from their farm. Early villas. The first villas, built during the Republic, were simple farmhouses surrounded by orchards, vineyards, and fields for growing crops and keeping animals. Most of these farms were run by manager, as the owner usually lived in town. Magnificent mansions. As Rome became more prosperous and more people became wealthy, grand country villas were built all over the empire. The rooms of these villas were often decorated with beautiful mosaics and wall paintings, some of which survive to this day. Some rooms showed scenes of everyday life, while others depicted events from Greek or Roman mythology. The most luxurious homes also had underfloor heating, a bakery, a bathhouse, and even a swimming pool. The villas near Rome, owned by the most wealthy citizens, were particularly impressive. Most villas were still part of the farm or estate, but many were situated well away from their fields. A few of the largest villas had no connection with farming and were built simply as lavish country homes. The nearby fields only grew food for the owner and his family. The grandest villas had spacious gardens full of statues and ornamental pools. People relaxed in courtyards surrounded by elegant columns, and the silence was broken only by birdsong and the rippling water of the fountain. Peace and quiet. Although the Romans were very sociable, they also valued the privacy of their country homes. The Roman writer Pliny remarked that he enjoyed not having to wear a formal toga at his villa. He also appreciated having no one living nearby. There's peace and quiet all around, which is just as good for your health as the clear sky and pure air. Hadrian's Villa. One of the most amazing villas was built by the Emperor Hadrian at Tivoli, near Rome. Hadrian designed a group of impressive buildings, including a stadium, a library, and 2 bathhouses, all surrounded by splendid gardens. He based some of the buildings on site he had seen during his travels to Egypt, Greece, and other parts of the empire, beside the seaside. Some of the most attractive villas were situated on beautiful stretches of coastline where their owners could spend summer days bathing in the sea. Fashionable Romans flocked to resort, such as Baiae on the Bay of Naples, where several emperors built lavish villas. The Emperor Tiberius had no fewer than 12 villas on the island of Capri, just off the Italian coast.